Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining me as we spend the next hour together. As always, I'm hoping that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. Coming up tonight, we'll be discussing the presidential election. We're just 6 days away now from that all-important election that is so pivotal in our lives. As always, as I've stated all this week, be sure you get out and vote. It's your right and it's your obligation to vote. Also coming up tonight, Grammy Award-winning musical artist Jermaine Dupri and Jonte Austin will join us to talk about their latest musical project called Change. And it's about effectuating change in our society to deal with the systemic racial divide that we have, as well as making sure that people, young people, get activated and ignited to get out the vote. That's coming up later in tonight's program. But first, my opening observations. Get out and vote. That is it. That is the momentum that you should have right now. Do whatever it takes to make sure that you vote. If you're doing it in person, do it safely. Socially distance yourself. Mask up, COVID down. But be sure you exercise your right to vote. And those are my opening observations. And welcome to the program. So topping things off, we have Gilda Cobb-Hunter. She is the president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. I thought it was good to have her come in and weigh in on what's happening with this campaign, this election that we're looking at. We're seeing people campaign and people go to the polls. Gilda, it's good to have you on.
The turnout has been tremendous across the country. I am elated. Of course, I want people to keep turning out. There are some snafus in a couple of states where the notion of absentee ballots and with what has gone on with the post office. And so I'm just encouraging everybody to keep their foot to the metal, pedal to the metal, if you will, and make sure we do all that we can between now and Tuesday, November 3rd, whether your polls close at 7 or 8 or 9, we can't stop working until that last poll closes. We've got a lot of races at stake, not just at the presidential level.
Yeah, and the races that are at stake, well, first, before I get to that, let's go to the point about what you're saying with those ballots that have already been mailed in and the fact that it smacks of voter suppression to be questioning the integrity of that, especially in the midst of a pandemic.
Without question. And a few months ago, when this issue of the Postal Service and the changes that have been made, when those things came to light and Congress started asking questions, quite frankly, that was a cue for all people who are concerned about maintaining the integrity of the balloting process to figure out a plan B that didn't involve the Postal Service. I think, quite frankly, while I'm pleased and proud to see the turnout, on one hand, it is just so sad, on the other hand, that we've got people in the greatest country in the world standing in line for 6, 10, 11 hours simply to cast a vote. That ought not be acceptable, Kelly, to anyone, regardless of which side of the aisle that they are on. We ought to figure out after this election, regardless of who is in power, we've got to take a look at our elections system and make some recommendations for changes. And the challenge, I would say, to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is, why are y'all so afraid of allowing people to vote? If your policies are so great, if your ideas are so great, then let's put them up and let people have a choice without placing all of these barriers in front of them.
The Senate race there in South Carolina, how tight is it?
Sure. The race is tight. There are polls, depending on which one you look at, that show Jamie slightly ahead. There are polls that have come out over the last couple of days that show him slightly behind. What I am saying to voters here in South Carolina is polls don't matter. What we've got to do is understand that the only poll that matters is the one that you actually go into to cast your ballot. I am hopeful. I am cautiously optimistic that Jamie will be able to pull this off. Jamie is the strongest candidate we've been able to field against Lindsey Graham here in South Carolina. He has been well funded. which has allowed him to get his message out, to introduce himself to South Carolina voters. He and his campaign have pretty much done everything that needs to be done. The rest is in the hand of the voters. I have maintained all along, Kelly, that for Jamie to be successful, what we need here is a super turnout amongst base voters and for white voters, whether they're Republican or independent, to be able to feel comfortable going into that ballot box and pulling the lever for Jamie. I think we've accomplished one piece of it with the high turnout. The rest depends on the amount of white vote he's able to carve away from Lindsey. If he's able to do that, we are going to wake up November 4th with a brand new U.S. Senator from the state of South Carolina.
Gilda Cobb-Hunter weighing in on the politics of the day, the election politics, and she represents the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. And that's about 750 state legislators who are there in your locale and trying to help you have a better life and to help us alleviate some of the health disparities and financial disparities that we've seen. Got to do it locally. Got to do it locally.
All politics is local. And Kelly, as always, thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate you. This won't be the last time, obviously. Got a lot happening. Lots of stuff happening. Thank you, Gilda. We'll be back with the West Coast Connection right after this. And welcome back to the program. So joining me now to talk about all things related to this election are my two esteemed colleagues. The West Coast Connections is back in the house. We've got attorney Mark Harris, who of course is a partner to the Ben Crump Law Firm, and Timothy Allen Simon, who is the chairman of the board of directors of the California Black Chamber of Commerce and also an attorney and owner of TAS Strategies. Gentlemen, here we are. We're in the last few days before the election. Voter turnout has been extremely heavy. It's in the millions, beyond 65 million people who have voted thus far. Early voting is usually a sign that Democrats are energizing their base, but Donald Trump remains on the campaign trail trying to energize his base as well. As we go through these final days, what are you anticipating out there, especially with a president who is still attacking his opponent, Joe Biden, and also attacking the integrity of this election?
You know, it's funny. First of all, thank you for having me back, Kelly. Good to see my dear friend, attorney Timothy Simon on as well. The California Connections in the house. There are a couple of things. First of all, everybody, you know, there's no longer a voting day in this country. There's a voting season. There's a voting period. We've been in the voting period now for over a month, and anyone who's within your viewership should have voted already. This isn't to chastise those who haven't, but if you want to make sure your vote counts and your voice is heard, you should participate in the process and not wait until Tuesday, November 3rd. That's the last period, if you will, for voting. The process now is more fluid, which is a good thing. So the numbers are bearing out that people are taking that call seriously. I don't understand why people still go to the polls. I mean, I do and I don't. We have COVID, we have distancing issues, we have health-related issues, we have long delays throughout the country. It seems to me the easiest thing in the world in order to exercise your vote, your right to vote, would be to fill it out and drop it in, either the postal box or the special boxes around the country that are designated for early voting. So hopefully, however a person votes, however a person chooses to exercise their right to vote, they'll do it between now and November 3rd.
But Timothy, you know, what's happening out there is that the president has been actually casting aspersions against mail-in ballots. And we do know that in Harris County, for example, Harris County, Texas, there is only one drop-off box for 4.7 million people who live in Harris County, Texas. And the Supreme Court has upheld the governor of that state to do that. This is happening all across the country, where Republicans are sending challenges, legal challenges, suing states for the way they're conducting their electoral process in the midst of a pandemic.
In 2020, we are still fighting for the right and access to the vote. people are lining up at the polls because due to the president and the post office general, they've lost trust in the postal system. My father at one time worked for the post office, as many African Americans did. But this president waged a campaign to discredit the post office and to claim that their engagement of doing what they are constitutionally assigned to do, in fact, there was a postal service before there was a constitution, is no longer a valid process. So he has put confusion in the market on top of the fact that he has mismanaged the COVID pandemic. So why were people mailing in? Why were states deciding to mail in? Because of the COVID pandemic, a pandemic that, by the way, the Asian nations have already moved past, as well as many other industrialized nations that are expecting another surge, but to a large extent, they have the matter managed. So he created the problem. He then attacked the problem and then intimidated by way of the problem. And this is just a ball of confusion, as the Temptations once said. And I personally think, I usually agree with my esteemed and brilliant colleague, but I personally think that people should find a plan and a way to get to the polls. I dropped my ballot at the polling station at San Francisco City Hall. It took me only 15 minutes. I did it a little over a week ago. But I do think people need to, as Mark did say, vote now. Get that ballot in whatever way you can, but vote now. There are states that are now cutting off the time that votes collected by mail can be counted. I never thought in my lifetime I would see a judge determine that a ballot that's postmarked cannot be counted because it didn't arrive at a certain time. We are seeing a war against our right to vote. And I believe at this time, the only solution is for us to continue this wave of African Americans and our allies who are running to the polls.
Timothy, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll have you finish up on that. But we also want to talk about what's happening in Philadelphia with demonstrations there and the family of a young Black man who was shot. He had some mental condition. He's dead. And the family, like we've seen so many families, are urging people not to loot, not to riot. We'll be back with more of the West Coast Connection right after this. Welcome back to the program. The West Coast Connections in the house right now, talking about all things as it relates to the political election that's going on, the presidential election. A lot of people lining up in the polls. And Timothy, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to what Attorney Mark Harris was stating about, COVID, and why we're seeing such a tenacious fight and such a divided fight for this election.
Well, I think you have to understand Donald Trump and his base. One, as we know, he stated that it was a hoax. Then he stated that it would go away. Then he proposed injecting bleach and Lysol. Part of that is what we've discussed before, is that libertarian movement within the Republican Party and government that opposes anything that appears to be an overreach of government. We heard Attorney General William Barr comment that the state shutdowns were the equivalent of chattel slavery, of human bondage. And they've always used this fear factor. And I firmly believe up until relatively a couple of years ago, being a Republican, that there was a race-based tone to that the federal government, the carpetbaggers in the Reconstruction South, were imposing their socialist positions on good families in America, which couldn't be anything further from the truth. In reality, we're trying to save the lives of these families, many families who have lost loved ones because of not following the wear a mask, safe distance, wash your hands. So Trump is communicating to that type of belief, that type of passion that does exist in this country. It's a factor that I think any politician, any policymaker has to take into consideration. That is, how is government's role viewed in a crisis, whether it's economic, health, or otherwise.
Let's turn our attention right now to the sad consequences of a police shooting in Philadelphia. They respond to a domestic call. They've been called by the family. The family has already forewarned 911 as well as the police that their son is going through a mental episode. Yet they opened fire on him after telling him to drop the knife. No tasers were used because they didn't have tasers, and they didn't shoot the lower extremities to wound the officer or even wound the young man or even try to take him down. He's dead. 14 shots in his body, riddled, and now people are protesting, and it's become quite ugly. Mark, I want to start with you. You're a civil rights attorney. Was this man's civil rights violated, and what do you anticipate in the days and weeks to come?
To be very short and direct, yes, his civil rights were violated. The ultimate civil right any of us have is to be able to live, to be able to breathe, and to be able to exist. So yes, his civil rights were violated. You know, one of the problems here, Kelly, as we have story after story, case after case, grieving family after grieving family, is that as long as municipal governments are able to get out of these situations by writing a big check, we're going to continue to have this. The taxpayers are the ones who bear the cost, literally and figuratively, of rogue police officers or a rogue police department. I was very disheartened to see an African-American woman come on the television and explain that the reason why those officers didn't use some other less lethal means is because her department didn't have the resources for that. So they didn't have, according to her, tasers. They didn't have dogs. They didn't have beanbags, all the other things that could be deployed to prevent the death of someone under a circumstance like this. She claimed that they didn't have. And again, the spokesperson and the mouthpiece for this ridiculousness was a Black woman. I was very disheartened to see that. So at the end of the day, Kelly, this won't change until we really get at what's rotten about policing. Whether you call it defund or reorganize or de-emphasize or whatever, families have to know that when they call law enforcement, when they call 911, if they're African American, they could wind up with someone dead. And that's a shame, and it's something that's intolerable.
And Timothy, you and I touched upon this yesterday when we heard Jerron Smith, a special assistant to the President of the United States, talk about some of the things that we're talking about right now, de-escalation. And yet we see in a city the size of Philadelphia, the fourth largest city in this country, a police department that knows how to conduct itself in many cases, and yet something went awry, training was not implemented, and a man is dead.
What we have here is an intersection of mental illness, race, and excessive police force. And this is near and dear to my heart. Here in San Francisco, we had a young man named Mario Woods, who was also schizophrenic and was on meds, and with a little small kitchen steak knife in his hand. Okay. The San Francisco Police Department emptied at least 12 bullets into this young man. And it actually led to probably the lack of confidence in the mayor at that time, a dear friend, the late Mayor Edwin M. Lee. Also, I have a member of my family, my extended family, a cousin, a Vietnam veteran who battles schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress. And his family cannot call the police. They know better when he has one of his bouts. So the police reform needs to be stop having armed officers attending to matters surrounding mental illness unless there is an imminent threat to the public. Two, we Black families in the Black community have to, unfortunately, just like we have the talk with our children, we have to have the talk about when we call the police, because there is a high likelihood, there's a considerable probability that that call will result in the death of a loved one. And I know that's not what whoever called the police, I know that's not what they intended. Yeah. I'm not trying to now, Monday quarterback trying to judge their decision at that time. But I think as a community and the community activists that we have, we need to begin to train our families that we cannot trust the police to handle certain matters, not necessarily because they're racist, not necessarily because to them Black lives don't matter, but many of them are not trained to handle the type of mental illness situation that unfortunately Mr. Wallace's family faced.
And the sad reality is that we now add Walter Wallace to the list of growing names of Black men and women and children who have been gunned down in situations where that could have been averted and de-escalated had police been operating perhaps with a social worker with them or a chaplain with them, something that could have de-escalated that tension that was there. Just an unfortunate, tragic set of circumstances. And the question is, how long will this go on? And the answer seems to be, we don't know yet, because Congress has not enacted all of the necessary laws and police departments are still enacting change. So gentlemen, as we move into the election, people need to get out and vote, not only for the president, but also vote locally. It's just that important.
You know, the other thing though, Kelly and both Kelly and Timothy, I'm very disappointed. I completely accept and agree with what Timothy just said about the talk. I was going to make a similar reference to that. But I've been speaking to young people both last week and this week, 2 different speaking engagements. It was invigorating to be with young minds and for them to be analyzing things as young people do. But one of the things they said to me I want to bring here, and that was, how many concessions are we expected to make?
Yes.
So we keep our hands at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock on the steering wheel. We announce when we're going to reach into our pocket for a cell phone. We're told not to speak disrespectfully to law enforcement or to use what could be misperceived as a harsh voice or any sudden moves. Now what we're telling our families is you can't call 911, even though every other community within your jurisdiction can call 911 if someone's having a mental break. I mean, at some point, somebody's got to say, you can take as many steps as you want to take, but you still can't put lipstick on a pig. Maybe it's time to get rid of the pig. And in this circumstance, I think what we need to do is really look at whether the business of policing really needs to be radically reformed in this country. And I think most of us will come back with the answer, yes.
Timothy Allen Simon, Mark Harris, attorneys et al., West Coast Connection. I appreciate you both very much. Obviously, we'll be talking between now and Election Day. Thank you so much for coming on and weighing in and providing your insights. Always good to hear from you both.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
We'll be back with more after this. In fact, we'll be talking about change from Jermaine Dupri. That's next. Welcome back to the program. I'm delighted to interview these next guests. They are Grammy Award-winning, hit-making artists, but they also have a conscience about what's happening socially and racially and politically in our country and globally. So without further ado, let me bring into the house Jermaine Dupri and Jonte Austin. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me to talk about this important project that you've launched called Change. Jermaine, I guess I will begin with you. When you and Jonte got together on this, you also collaborated with a couple of other artists and some NBA players to get this done. Why?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, first of all. Well, I mean, initially, the idea was a song that Jonte and I had worked on prior. And I just kept thinking about this time that we're in and how I didn't really see anybody making music about what was going on. And it was a little bit disturbing to me, because it was like, okay, only the older artists like Public Enemy or Marvin Gaye or the people from those times seemed like they was the ones that cared about talking about what was going on at the time. And then once I started looking at that, then people started making records. Usher came out with one. Trey Songz made a record. Tyrese made a record. A couple of people started making more records. So I was a little bit, I felt better. And I felt like, okay, so now it's a space for this. And I hit Jonte and I was like, we got to change this song. We got to fix this song. And I want to make it a bigger record. I want to put, multiple people on here, multiple artists, and try to create what's similar to what I did with Bono with What's Going On when the 9/11, 9/11 things happened. But with the blueprint of We Are the World, that was my idea to try to get to that space. So and once I started and we titled the song Change, one morning I was just watching Good Morning America, and Dwayne Wade and Chris Paul was on Good Morning America, and they was launching the Social Change Fund. And I was just like, oh, this is the perfect place. I didn't know if it was gonna happen, but I was like, this seems like it connects because it says change. And then once I checked out what they was talking about and their foundation, for one, it's not something that they don't need the money. And their message is really, really loud from what we saw during the playoffs. So I was just like, this is the perfect vehicle of people to be in the car with, because they speaking it louder than anybody. So it just all started coming together. And then after that, Jonte and Neo had this versus battle on Instagram where they was playing both of their music, and I saw the reaction of that. So then I was like, okay, let's get Neo to write on this record as well. And it just was just a build, I don't know if I had to, if we weren't locked up, that it would have come together like this.
That's a good point. Jonte, what do you say about that? If you weren't under a lockdown situation and forced to look at the realities of the disparities from coronavirus and the racial disparities that revealed.
No, I agree. I think that, being locked down, if you will, gives us time to kind of think and to kind of focus and zero in and potentially block out some of the noise, but also, block out the noise, but focus on things that are really important. I mean, and you see, like you said, the disparities just in our community, that have always been there. And it kind of gave the rest of the world a view of what Black people have, seen every day, witnessed every day, lived every day in our community, not just, with police, but, healthcare disparities and access to jobs and the things that disproportionately affect Black people. You kind of see those things even more because, we were all equal when this thing hit. Like, no one can go anywhere, and everyone's, people who had secure jobs are losing jobs, and no one can find toilet paper. It's like, you could be the richest person in the world, and if the toilet paper ain't on your shelf, it ain't on your shelf. So it definitely gave us an opportunity to sit down and and really look at things.
Yeah, and when you sit down and really look at things, I want to talk more about that, about what you've been able to perceive over the landscape of America since COVID-19 hit, and then the racial division that's hit since the death of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. We're talking to Jermaine Dupri and Jonte Austin. We'll be back in a moment right after this break. Welcome back to the program. So the musical project is called Change, and we're here to talk about change and how important that is with the artists and the Grammy Award-winning producers and hit makers who have produced this noble aspiration to get the world to change. And that's Jermaine Dupri and Jonte Austin. And gentlemen, it's a very good project, and it says a lot and speaks a lot from your personal heart of what you've seen happening in America. As we talked about in the previous segment with COVID-19 and the disparities that revealed. Jermaine, when you've seen the heartbreak that was so apparent with George Floyd and people around the world protesting for racial justice, social justice, to your core, what did you see and what impact does that have on you today?
I just saw a lack of leadership, and I think that's what I, not that I wanted to lead people to do, but I felt like that's what this song kind of, it takes the lead of making sure that people understand that we are not just watching this, we are a part of this, and we're living this just as well as, just as well as the people that are involved with it. I mean, it's tougher for them, but at the same time, the racism is heightening. You know what I mean? Amongst things like this happening, if you're a Black man, you probably, I know I'm scared than ever at this point, because you don't know what's going to happen. I just saw 2 days ago, Offset from the Migos was going through a situation where the police was telling him to get out the car, and they snatched him out the car. They had guns drawn on him. So, I mean, it's we all are feeling it. So for me, like I said, I just wanted to do my part, and try to get people to really think about how bad we need to change and how much we need to change. But it can't start just out there. It's got to start within as well.
Absolutely. When we protest, we should also have policy. And Jonte, you stepped out there to cast an early vote. You stood in line for 11 hours. Tell me about that and why it mattered so much to you.
Well, I didn't expect to stand there that long. I thought I was going to get in and get out, and then that wasn't the way it worked. Um, the experience for me of voting is just very personal. My grandfather was a member of SNCC with John Lewis, and a member of SCLC with Dr. King. And I remember hearing stories and seeing pictures, of the brutality that they faced down in Mississippi when they went down there in 1966. So, my grandfather, Bill Harris, just kind of hearing those stories and instilling what Black people before us went through to get us the right to vote. And, many of them gave their lives, like literally, all of them put their lives on the line, and then some actually paid that ultimate sacrifice. So when you think about John Chaney down in Mississippi, who's killed for organizing voter registration, and my grandfather, when he was beaten in jail, he was organizing a voter registration for young students down there and fighting against segregation in the schools. So for me, it's a personal thing. I've always voted since I turned 18. I've voted in every election that was available.
Look, let's talk more about the song because it's about change, but it's also about hope. That
Yes.
sounds very familiar, hope and change. So tell me about that, if you will, about not just talking about the change, but also letting hope prevail.
Yeah, I think what we saw, and really the message of the song is that, yes, we need change, but it's really starting, with ourselves, and not in the way, a lot of people talk about, oh, well, it's the personal responsibility and take it, and it's that, but it's in a different way. It's really, I think about a story that I heard of James Baldwin telling young students at Howard, like, I'm going to make you a deal that if you don't believe the lies that this nation tells about you, that I won't believe them either. I don't want you to believe them about yourself. And so that's what the song is about, is that, we want to give people that hope and that change. And it starts by this song and us telling, Black men, Black women, Black culture, like, we don't believe the negative things that they say about us. I don't believe it about my fellow, Black brother or sister. Don't believe it about me. And that's how we're going to change, because it starts with us, but it starts with us because we believe in each other. Like that is what the song is about. We can be the change, because I believe that about everyone in our culture. Like we're calling for people to change because we know that every one of us has it in us, and we believe that about each other.
Change is inevitable, but change is something that we all as Black people must work together on to build upon. And we have been through a difficult year this year, going back to Kobe Bryant and losing him, and then COVID-19 and Chadwick Boseman, and the list goes on about the problems that we've had in George Floyd. And Jermaine, when you see the social deconstruction of America, if you will, where people are so concerned and people are not doing enough to actually mitigate white supremacy. We see that people are actually trying to kidnap a governor of Michigan and a governor of Virginia. It makes your head spin. It's like out of a weird movie that went awry, yet this is reality. So
Yes.
based on that, do you see a brighter future through your music and through your contributions to helping people be lifted up?
I mean, I hope so. I don't put it on my music to be that thing, but I hope that it can help spark people's minds, right? So in the song, if you watch the song and how the song was built, what I was trying to do was show that we all should be under the same mindset. So the song starts with Big Rube, who was a poet from Atlanta here that was, from Outkast and Goody Mob and the Dungeon Family. And from him, the word jumps into coming, right? And the same word jumps from coming to Kurt Franklin. And from Kurt Franklin, it goes back to Common and it goes to me. And I wanted people just that was the wave that I wanted this record to, because we have to speak the same language, right? And one of the other things that I wanted to say was that making this record, I wanted to make a dent from a younger mindset, because I also feel like that's not being listened to and that's not being seen in politics. For some reason, politics it has to be older people. Now, there's nothing wrong with people being older, but I do believe that Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and all of these guys, they was young as when I started music. And this was the interest of theirs, just like John Tay was saying. And we got to get back to that. We got to get back to some younger people being involved with this stuff, because the younger people are the ones that make a difference when it comes to this voting. And the younger people are the ones that's on the fence about voting. So they're going to have somebody, we're going to get somebody in here that speaks the language that they can really understand. And that's why I went after Keydron Bryant. That's why I put the Detroit Youth Choir on here. I just wanted to make sure that energy was being spewed. And I wanted these kids to basically sing it to y'all. And you feel it from that perspective, not older people.
And that's a great place to start and end it. Jermaine Dupri, John Tay Austin, and we're going to play your song Change tonight in closing the show. And I like the fact that you've talked about love, because I end this show every night talking about we've got to be united and ignited to keep spreading knowledge and love, freedom, and peace. So I thank you all for doing that through this powerful song called Change. Jermaine Dupri, John Tay Austin, much love to you all. Let's stay in touch. We'll have you on again and again, and keep effectuating some change. God bless you all.
All right.
Thank you, brother. God bless.
We're back with my final word and the song Change after this. And welcome back to the program. I want to thank everyone who appeared on tonight's show, and I particularly want to express my gratitude to Jermaine Dupri and John Tay Austin for, one, composing a powerful song about change. Before we leave you tonight, we'll be actually showing you that song. So in my final word, let me read from their lyrics. It states, "These are tough times we live in, but still we can't just give in. We must stand tall and live strong. It's up to the youth to live on and carry this torch we pass down. You see, I know it's not the last round. In the next generation, my faith is unwavering. My confidence in you is unshakable, because I know that you're willing and far beyond capable of doing all that must be done. But to do it all, we must be as one." Those are the lyrics from the new song Change. And we leave you tonight with a look at that. And hopefully, as always, we've been righted, ignited, and united to keep spreading love, freedom, and peace. Good night, everyone.
These are tough times we live in, but still we can't just give in. We must stand tall and live strong. It's up to the youth to live on
and carry this torch we pass down. You see, I know it's not the last round. In the next generation, my faith is unwavering.
My confidence in you is unshakable, because I know that you're willing and far beyond capable of doing all that must be done.
But to do it all, we must be as one.
Life can be better than most of us dream.
Yeah.
So once you take the reins, believe in your greatness which lies within.
And for the better, this world will change.
I see that you want it. I see that you're working for it. So don't take no days off. It's gonna pay off. I see that you love it. I want you to know that before you can see it, you gotta believe it.
You're the generation of tomorrow.
The pursuit starts today, and all time is borrowed. So you have learned the ways.
You are not, oh I repeat,
You are not put on the search to lose. And you are hot, yeah, I repeat it, but you are hot, so do what you do. And we gon' do it big, we gon' make a scene. We gon' take the doubters, make them all believe. We gon' be the change that we wanna see. We're not taking average, chasing legend status. We can have the world, we can have it all. Nothing is too big, nothing is too small. We can be the change that we wanna see. We're not taking average, chasing legend status. Oh no no, I see that it's in your heart. I see that it's in your heart. I feel it, I feel your desire.
It only takes one spark. It only takes one spark to set it on fire.
You're the generation of tomorrow, but the work starts today.
And all time is borrowed, so there's no time to wait.
You and I, yeah, I repeat, you and I, put on this earth to lose. And you are hot, yeah, I repeat it, you are hot, so do what you do. Yeah. And we gon' do it big, we gon' make a scene. We gon' take the dollars, make them all believe. We gon' be the change that we wanna see. We're not taking average, chasing legend status. We can have the world, we can have it all. Nothing is too big, nothing is too small. We can be the change that we wanna see. We're not taking average, chasing legend status.
Let's go.
You can have anything you want, but know the work must still be done. The power to change the world is in your hands. One is a dream without action, nothing but a reason to stay asleep. You gotta wait, make a decision. Life is for the living, and it's yours, but you gotta go get it. We gon' do it big, we gon' make a scene. We gon' take the dollars, make them all believe. We gon' be the change that we wanna see. We're not taking average, chasing legend status. We can have the world, we can have it all. Nothing is too big, nothing is too small. We can be the change that we wanna see. We're not taking average, chasing legend status.
We gon' do it big, yeah. Oh, do it. All we gotta do is do it. Nothing can stop us now.